Welcome to The Investigators. I'm Vanessa Murphy, investigative reporter at KLAS TV in Las Vegas. We are going to talk about an issue that affects everyone in Nevada. This is super important. We are talking about water. And joining me is Ian Russell, executive producer. You really wear a lot of hats, Ian, in this newsroom.
Yeah, executive producer of politics and the investigative team and producers in general. So, and I've been covering water for about 20 years because I've been here about that long. So,
yeah. And so when you see a news broadcast, you see us, but then there's a lot of people behind the scenes who put in a lot of work. And in our newsroom, if I have a question when I'm covering a water-related issue, Ian is my go-to. He knows this issue inside and out. And we are recording this on Monday, July 27th. This episode will air this evening on our CTV channel, but it will also live on YouTube. You can click on it later on CTV. But again, we're recording this Monday, July 27th. And this week really marks a crucial deadline, Ian. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So the Colorado River Compact deal is about to run out, so they have to come up with a new, they call them interim guidelines, but basically it's what everyone agrees to use from the river. And the Interior Secretary, Doug Burgum, said this week that he was going to lay out what they think the preliminary plan should be since the 7 states couldn't agree on one themselves. And so we have a bit of an idea of what it might be, but it's a bit up in the air, and I think everybody expects there'll be a little something they like and a little something they don't like from it all.
Yeah. So again, you have these upper basin states and the lower basin states that essentially share the water from the Colorado River. And it's basically not coming to an agreement, as you mentioned, of how to divide that water, which state gets how much water. And if we don't reach that agreement, the federal government steps in. Why would that be a last resort? Why wouldn't we want the federal government to step in?
Well, I think the 7 states think, even though, it's like siblings, even though you're fighting, you could still come to some agreement. You still have some sort of common interest. Everybody needs some sort of water. Everybody agrees agriculture needs to get used to some degree. But once the federal government comes in, it's just mom and dad coming in and telling you what to do, and you're no longer hashing out little differences yourself that way. So
less flexibility, essentially.
Less flexibility. And then going forward, it's less flexibility to, that was a mistake. Let's smooth that part out, because now you have to do 8 other levels of approval before you can do that. Right.
And so in Nevada, and we talk about this a lot, we are essentially a leader in water conservation. And I know that we have these limits, right, on when you can maybe water your lawn. And we do have certain things, or these incentives to get rid of your grass. And we see public areas, the grass being removed. And we do those stories about the top water users. And that's really a list you don't want to be on, because it might be someone with a giant home with a lot of grass, where we're all trying to do our part, or we hope we're trying to do our part. And so in Nevada, though, Lake Mead, talk about how Lake Mead is part of our water, to break it down.
Sure. So I guess we didn't say, but there's the upper basin states, lower basin states. You can kind of think of Lake Mead as a barrier in between the 3. The 3 lower basin states, which is Arizona, California, and us. And then the upper basin states, which are Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and I'm blanking one for 2 seconds. But the Lake Mead basically is the largest reservoir and the stopping point, so it's where everything gets stored. For us, it's, of course, same with Lake Powell for Arizona, it's a source of recreation and all that other stuff, too. So outside of just that's where our water comes from, and that's where everybody else's water comes from, it's also an economic driver and all that stuff for the region. So Lake Mead dropping hurts us more than just our ability to, water the lawn or take a shower. It's also, we make a lot of money off that. It's one of the largest recreation areas in the nation.
And Kyle Payne is at the lake as we speak. And Carlos, if we can show this video he sent back, I don't know if you really get the sense of how low, but you sort of at the top there, the water line.
The bathtub ring there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, we should not be seeing that much on that lower half.
So when it's full, the top of that ring, it's the elevation's like 1,250 feet, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
We're 200 feet below that right now, and about less than a foot as of we sit this second from hitting a new record low. And then the projections from the federal government that everybody agrees upon is that it'll drop another 30 feet. So that line will go down 30 feet in the next 2 years.
Not
So,
good. And then you
situation.
also see in that video, there was something, I don't know if I can tell what it is, but you see things sort of, that's when we see perhaps more discoveries from the lake because there's less water to cover it.
The audience probably remembers a couple years ago when you started having speedboats getting exposed,
Yes.
and there were barrels with bodies of them found in the river.
Yeah.
That was when we were at the record. That's when we set the record low that we're about a half a foot away from now. So we can expect more of that stuff.
Oh, boy. All right. When we come back, we are going to hear from Colorado. Let's take a break. Welcome back to The Investigators. I'm Vanessa Murphy, joined by Ian Russell.
Hello.
I consider him our water expert in our newsroom. He knows a lot about this issue. We are in a dire situation. The states that share the Colorado River need to come to an agreement on how to divide that water. Recently, I interviewed Colorado's representative. Let's take a look.
They're still ongoing, to be perfectly honest. I think it is a bit tough. The conversations are tough. And I think one of the things to recognize, and I think people don't commonly recognize this, as the hydrology's gotten worse, the conversations have gotten tougher. And we're in some of the worst hydrology we've ever seen right now. So the conversations are as tough as they ever have been. And I think that part of that is because there's just not enough to go around.
Are you able to sort of take us behind the scenes of the negotiations? Like, is there one state that seems maybe more willing to compromise than others? And is there anything you can sort of say to take viewers behind the scenes in some way?
I think in terms of there's always personality dynamics, there's always state dynamics. And I think one of the difficulties is that each state has dynamics within their own state. There's conflicting interests within their own states. And that makes conversations difficult because you're having one or two or a few people represent multiple interests. And I think that's always difficult. In terms of making a deal, it's not so much about the deal as it is about the math. And the math is just not working.
Is there any state you want to call out for sort of lagging behind in helping this situation?
I think all of the states are taking proactive action. Are they taking enough? And I think one of the things that's important to recognize and acknowledge is that there is a priority system. We have a priority system in the Upper Basin that we administer water rights based on priority, and those that are junior are cut off when the water is not there. And so in terms of lagging behind, I think we have to look at what is actually lagging behind is administration of water below Mead.
What is the downside of the federal government stepping in and taking over if the states can't agree?
That's the biggest downside that I see. I think one of the difficulties that when we talk about the difficult conversations that we're having and the difficulty coming to a deal, All of those things are hard and not enjoyable all the time. But what would be a real disappointment is if that we can't find some way to continue to lead and solve it ourselves. Like that is the fear, right? Because we're capable. We're one of the most developed nations. We have the ability to be innovative and creative and create flexibilities. But once we release some of the reins, the states release some of the reins and control, I don't believe we'll ever get it back in the same way. And so that's the biggest downside to the feds coming in.
What got my attention, especially when you said cut people off. So that's like, could you maybe explain a little more on that?
Exactly. And you touched on that when you said, what are you doing? How, we're doing all of this in Las Vegas. What we do is essentially there's a priority system. And if there's not enough flow in the river, a water user doesn't get their water. So an example of that, like this year is a perfect example. And Michael touched on that we're cutting people off that are senior to the Colorado River Compact. So people with water rights that are in the 1800s. So there was an exhibited use in the late 1800s that they're being cut off too. Another, like an example of that would be in the southwest corner of Colorado, the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. This is a federally recognized tribe with settled and developed water rights. They are cut to 8% of their allocation. 8%. They're getting 8%, and they worked with their neighbors and purchased some of their water rights or their ability to use some of their water rights. And they purchased that themselves. They didn't get a check from the federal government or anything like that. They purchased it themselves and got up to 14%.
I mean, I don't really like hearing about cutting water off to the tribe. This is just a dire situation.
Yeah, those are, at this point, every state is kind of making internal decisions for their own state on how they think they can save water. You mentioned earlier we're the best at water recycling. And then we've done things like get rid of decorative grass and all that for other states. Colorado, Arizona, some too, just cutting people off. So,
wow. Anything else you want to say about her interview?
To translate water speak a little bit, so when she refers to the states below Lake Mead to do more, she's saying us. And Nevada, of course, as we mentioned a couple times, we're kind of the leader in water conservation. The lower basin states have agreed to cut 15 to 20% already, additionally. And they want Colorado and the upper basin states to pitch in and cut some as well. And you heard her argument saying, no, you guys just need to keep going. And that's kind of the crux of the disagreement at this point.
Right. And to sort of let our viewers into some behind the scenes, we did not have to chase her for that interview. We received an email, hey, do you want to talk to Becky Mitchell of Colorado? And you and I are, okay, let's do it.
Heck yes,
I mean, they don't often... They don't usually offer that. So she wanted to talk, and she wanted to give her state's side, which I thought was interesting. Another interesting point was no questions were off the table. Sometimes you might get an official, their representative will say, well, they only want to talk about A, B, and C. Of course, we never agree to that, but sometimes there's a little bit of a back and forth. There was none of that. She answered all of my questions. You heard her mention when I said, well, who's not agreeing, or a question of that sort. She mentioned personality dynamics. That was her phrase. And I would really like to know what she meant by that. I should have done a follow-up. She wouldn't have said probably. But it's like my question is, who is not agreeing? Who is the most resistant, and what exactly do they want? I don't know if we'll find that out, because these negotiations mainly happen behind closed doors.
Yeah, and Yeah, they are in the middle of a negotiation, so they're not going to say something they think will blow that up, of course. And although we're focusing on one or two big issues, there's 110 little issues that got to get worked out along the way as well. And so it's hard to know which of those really is causing so much friction.
All right, when we come back, we'll hear from Nevada. Welcome back to The Investigators. I'm Vanessa Murphy, joined by Ian Russell. We are talking about water. We need an agreement between these states to figure out what to do about dividing the Colorado River. We're going to hear from our Southern Nevada representative. Let's take a look.
Where are the negotiations at?
So what we're closing in on and what we think will be hitting the streets in the next 2 months is a very short-term deal. It's looking at operations for the next 2 years. Those things include how much water comes from Lake Powell to Lake Mead, what the level of reductions are within the lower basin states of Arizona, Nevada, and California, how we store water and continue to have incentive to leave water within Lake Mead, as well as what reservoirs upstream of Lake Powell will participate and when to help out with the low reservoir conditions.
Are you confident that, at least to the extent that there will be a 2-year deal, that it gets reached with all the states?
I'm more confident than I have been, but these negotiations have been very tough. Where we sit today and when we look at the problems in the future, we're faced with a negotiation where everyone has to have less. And what we've found and what we've seen is everyone wants to point fingers, talk about all the good things they've done and all the things their sister states have failed to do, and why they shouldn't have to take on the lion's share of what's next. I'm hopeful that we are closing in on the ability for 7 states to say this works for the next couple of years.
So of the 7 states, we know one isn't in that category of states pointing fingers. I would say that would be Nevada. So who's making it so tough?
I think everyone, to a degree, has their own pieces of the law that matter. It's no secret that the flow at Lee's Ferry is reaching and has gone below this year what most of the lower basin states consider the compact obligations. So for the first time, we're faced with negotiating a river deal while our reservoirs are critically low and all of our legal theories are being tested at the same time. It makes it a lot harder to reach compromise on what the future looks like when people think the law is read 2 very different ways.
If you're this close to a 2-year deal, what is in the way of getting that done?
I think right now it's the minutia. It's how does it get written up? How is it described? How do we get all of the agreements that provide the right assurances that things are going to work the way we think they're going to work? But at a high level, we're agreeing on the major points.
What's the timeline you've been given on when the government will step in?
Well, so the government is in the process of doing a NEPA process. That's National Environmental Policy Act, They've already published a draft environmental impact statement. In order to conclude that, they have to publish a final environmental impact statement and then a record of decision. That record of decision is either supporting something that all 7 states support or taking unilateral action because we couldn't get there. And we anticipate that that's going to be out sometime in the next 4 weeks or so.
So given that as a backdrop, what is the main sticking point for us?
Right now, I would say Nevada continues to be one of the more flexible people at the table. We want to see the agreements written in a way that respects our legal positions and that provides us significant certainty over operations. We don't want to be left guessing how much water is coming into Lake Mead and how much do we get. We want to create a framework where we can look at the hydrology, we can look at the models, and we can plan to exactly what water supply we're going to have.
Do you feel any state is specifically stopping a deal from being made?
I don't believe that any state is stopping a deal from being made. I think that everyone has their own unique politics related to the river and the boards or governing bodies that relate to the river. Some of those are in the press significantly more than others. I don't think that means that anybody's having an easy or a hard time. It's just a tough thing to do.
I don't ever assume that anyone watched my story, but I'm going to assume you saw the one where we interviewed Colorado's Becky Mitchell.
Yes.
Okay. She says, essentially, lower basin states need to take on the brunt of these cuts. What is your initial reaction to that?
So the lower basin has been managing within what the law gives us. We've been using significantly less. So if we look back to 2002 and compare it to last year, the lower basin states, Arizona, Nevada, California, we've used 33% less water from the river over that time. If we look at the upper basin states, they've used 6% more. Climate change isn't new. We've been looking at projections of what it means for the river for years to come. The lower basin has been adapting to that, while the upper basin has been using the same amount of water.
And so that was Kyle Payne, of course, with Deputy General Manager Colby Pellegrino. What do you want to say about her interview, Ian?
I think SNWA has been very, very on message every time a water story comes up, which is frequent. They stress that, which you heard her say at the end there, that we've been preparing for 20 years. And if this goes to court, they feel like we're best positioned because we've actually been doing the right things. And other states are just now, oh, hey, we should probably do something about all this water going away.
Right. And just to reiterate, we need to reach an agreement. The states need to reach an agreement on how to divide the Colorado River and the upper basin states in Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming.
Yeah, messed that up earlier.
That's okay. Lower basin, Arizona, California, Nevada. One of the biggest questions we get from viewers, and I had asked them previously about this, is if we are short on water, why do we keep building? Their answer is that we are good at recycling water, and anything in the drain, right, is recycled.
Yeah, hits the drain, gets recycled, and we only use 2/3 of what we're allotted to begin with. So cuts don't necessarily get down to what we even use.
Final thoughts. We have a minute.
Final thoughts is it'll be an interesting week to see what the federal government plan is. I know Doug Burgum told a Wyoming newspaper last week that, like, well, if everybody hates it, that probably means it's a good plan. I would say that's an okay sentiment coming from individual states, but I don't know. It could just be a bad plan, and that's why everybody hates it. So we'll see. Of course, lower basin states will take cuts, and the big question for us is, will the upper basin states as well? So.
Right. Okay. We will continue to follow this. Thanks so much for watching.